Okay, howdy. So, the book that I'm going to review today is Baron Wenkheim's Homecoming, and that's by Laszlo Krasznahorkai. And throughout this whole thing, I'm going to apologize probably 100 times for my bad pronunciations. It's everything I can do to just squirrel away the deep Southern American accent for you. It's translated by Ottilie Mulzet, released I think about 2-3 weeks ago, and it is out by New Directions, is the publisher. So before I get into the specifics of that review, just a quick sort of, since this is my first, why I decided to do this, how I'm going to try to stick with it. I can stick with very long books that I'm in no way interested in continuing to read for some reason out of stubbornness, but my own creative projects, I think like a lot of people's, fall off due to life and everything else and stagnation. So I have this really, really specific love and interest in translated literary fiction. It's not something that I have an opportunity. I live in, outside of Raleigh, North Carolina in the United States. It's not something I have an opportunity on any sort of day-to-day level to discuss with other people, friends, family, coworkers, the kind of sort of suburban dad life that I lead. So I thought I started to get back involved with Twitter. I found that if you muted the words Trump, that I would not cycle into a depression and would keep my blood pressure stable. And basically it was like, this time I'm just going to use it for this specific thing that I love and that I spend so much time, reading and thinking about, and that's translated literature. So when I started to do that, I thought I'd also like to join the conversation because there's so many awesome people that are reviewing stuff. They're giving me recommendations, and I thought that if a couple people found this interesting, it's at least interesting to me for posterity's sake. Maybe 20 years from now, when my children are a little more grown, they'll wonder what dad was reading. And I just think it's something that it's really important to promote because these are, for the most part, contemporary novels that are outstanding. I mean, it's a tremendous world of small presses, university presses, nonprofit presses, that are putting out this stuff for a labor of love. And so as a sort of weird thank you, I want to review some and talk about them. The internet it's supposed to be like this connecting place that brings us all together. And maybe I'm just bad at it, but I find it often to just sort of be lonely and disconnecting. And I thought this might give me a chance to put myself out there and try to connect in a more meaningful way about the stuff that I actually love. So that all aside, and if I didn't say, my name is Derek Main. So I'll have like a link to my Twitter thing down below if I can figure out how to do that. This is all new. So this novel has been, I would say, really, really hyped. People are very excited about it. I thought it was a pretty good first one to start with. Also, primarily because I have spent the last 5 nights just immersed in it, in the world. And a lot of times I read 2 to 3 books at a time, and this is one that it's captured all of my attention. And I have stayed up, well past 2 a.m, which is way past my bedtime. The last 3 nights just savoring every bit of it. So I wanted to give it a review and kind of tell you a little bit about what it's about. It's also a really good starter, I think, for somebody who loves fiction but is maybe not dipped their toes into translated literature, because there are a lot of elements that, you see how thick this thing is, right? It is 548 pages, so it seems like such a behemoth, but it's actually a complete and total page turner. And it has a lot of elements of mystery and thriller that I'll talk about that make it just kind of so exciting to stick with. I'm going to start though by talking a little bit about the structure of how it's written, because that can be a challenge for some people. And I actually have a recommendation for that before I get into what he does, and that is this beautiful, also published by New Directions, very, very tiny, other title by him called The Last Wolf. And this one is translated by George Zertze. And the nice thing about this is it's a one-sitting read. So the other half of this are two other stories, which actually I have not read yet, but I love The Last Wolf. And it is what I would call like 1.5 Diet Cokes out on the front porch type of read. You know, it's one sitting. If it wasn't inexplicably 99 degrees here in October, that would be a really lovely thing to do on the front porch right now. But you'll get a sense of what he's doing, because this is what I would call a long short story. Maybe you'd call it a short novella. It is with very liberal margins, 76 pages, and it's one sentence. And that can really kind of turn some people off, because it's like, where's your entry point? Where's your exit point when you're reading? And the way that he is able to write, not just with the grammar and the use of sort of ellipses and the things you'd expect, but also the way he is able to sort of transition to actually tell a full plot and story within the context of a sentence, oftentimes going back and forth between who's remembering something versus who is recounting that memory to someone else. He does a really good job with it. And I mention that to say this book is in sections, and in each one you're going to have paragraphs that are one sentence that could span maybe a page and a half, sometimes 3-4 pages. And so once you have that kind of introduction, you can really get a sense of how you can read it. Now, the nice thing is it is in sections, and it is split up by those paragraphs. So a really easy kind of thing to keep on reading. But as you first start it, if you see this huge, long sort of block of text, you know, I really don't want that to be something that sort of turns you off. All right, so let's start with the plot, and we'll see how that edit that I just tried actually worked out. That'll be my first time trying that. I don't like to do a huge sort of synopsis of this is everything that happens in this book. It's a monster, as you can see. But essentially, there's two kind of things going on at the same time. One is this very rich, older baron is coming back to his hometown in Hungary. This is a small, kind of forgotten town that I would classify, I would say like they're exhausted, right? Like nothing good has kind of come. There's a ton of sort of corruption with the civil servants and the police force, and it's just sort of a town that's exhausted and kind of given up a little bit. So this baron is coming back because he has been exiled from South America for gambling debts. And his family has paid to kind of cover that up and then send him back to the place of his birth. The town is wildly anticipating his arrival because they believe he is going to be sort of their capitalist messiah, if you will, the savior. He's going to come and revitalize, rejuvenate this town with his many riches. His purpose for going back is to see a long lost love interest. And that part of it makes it seem like it's going to be sort of this romance, end of life. The gentleman's about 67, I think, the Baron story. But one of the things I really like about it is that it kind of touches on this thing that happens to us as we get older. And I'm only half the age of the character, so I've only got little traces of this, but I think I can really feel it, where there's certain people that come along at important inflection points of your life, particularly in your youth. And as you move further and further away from those people and those places and that time, those people kind of become stand-ins for the nostalgia of that place and that time, and probably mostly stand-ins for yourself as you were younger and the world of infinite possibilities was in front of you, as opposed to whatever life, whatever path it turned out you took. So I think of it more as a love story, that aspect, to an idealized version maybe of a past. And that can sound like it's dripping with nostalgia and sentiment, and there's a little bit of that, but not overwhelmingly so. I mean, I'm actually someone who doesn't love nostalgic writing so much, and I had no problem with it. But I think that if you put yourself in those shoes as the Baron, and you kind of think about those people in your life who you may even say you love them, you may feel that you love them, But when you sort of take a step back, you have to think about what it is that you're loving, whether it's a person or whether this is a feeling, and you've connected that person with that feeling. Sort of the same reason that like people like me still listen to really crappy post-punk from the late 1990s, because there's that connection with the feeling. So anyway, that's one aspect of the story. The Baron is coming home. That's his homecoming. The town is very excited. He's going to imbibe with them with all his riches, and he's coming back to see his long-lost love. The other parallel narrative in the same town is a renowned professor, and he was a renowned professor of mosses, but he is renowned throughout the town, and it makes clear kind of throughout the whole world. He is, I would say, before he does what he does, I would say maybe he's their star citizen, or something like that. What he does, when the novel starts off, is he has moved to a shanty in this overgrown sort of thicket at the edge of town, and he is going through thought immunization exercises, and he is trying to basically shun himself from the world. And we don't necessarily know why. We just sort of see him going through this. But the real comedy of that aspect is as the world continues to come to him, and these various events and calamities transpire, and as he's trying to do this sort of hermit existence, how that sort of affects that plan. And within that section, really what unfolds is this really fascinating thriller. Like it's truly a thriller where you are on the edge of your seat about what is going to happen next due to some events that have transpired with him. And so while that's going on, like you get really sucked in, and then the section stops, and now we're going back to the Baron and the townsfolk. That's one of the things that makes this so readable and such a page turner. The Baron and the townfolk stuff just as stunning and just as rich, and in fact probably more thematic, than a little bit of the one-noteness, of the professor's story. And I would say the professor's story is probably 25% to 75%. So that makes sense, right? But what's going on in that story is more what I would call a mystery. And I know mystery, thriller are sometimes interchangeable, but I find them to be really different. The mystery is not, what is going to happen necessarily, although of course you're interested in that. And it's not necessarily like we're trying to solve a murder or a crime. It's not that kind of mystery. It's sort of the mystery of the town, the mystery of his presence there, the mystery of these types of places in the world and how they live day to day, how they occupy our minds. It's filled with characters that are con men and grifters and corrupt civil servants, that are sort of all encircling around the Baron and this town as he is focused on this like one sort of mission at the end of his life. And thematically, one of the things that I found, especially through that part, although frankly in the professor sections as well, a real sense of dread that I loved. I'm hesitant to use this comparison because I kind of know how it comes off, but it reminds me of Roberto Bolaño's writing in that way. And I say I'm hesitant because Roberto Bolaño is obviously a huge name in translated literature. Just for some background for me, for my 30th birthday, a great friend of mine gave me a copy of Savage Detectives. So that was 8 years ago. I wouldn't call Savage Detectives one of my top 10, top 20. I mean, it's not, it's a great book, but it's not like my favorite book of all time. But it is the book that set me on this path. I was always a big reader, but that particular book and then Bolaño, as I went through the rest of his work, that's sort of what opened me up and made me kind of a dork for this kind of translated literature. So it's a little weird that I'm making that comparison, but I think it's true. I do think that sense of dread, and that's the only comparison between the two authors I would make, but the sense of dread that is occurring in Homecoming is something that we see throughout Roberto Bolaño's work, and also this sense of it may not be buttoned up, that this is an effervescent, sort of all-encompassing feeling of the place, the people, the weather, the circumstances, that it's all kind of one mesh of dread without a lot of hope. And of course, since there is a love story connected in here, and there is missions, right? Like the mission of the professor to leave this world, right? And then the mission of the Baron to find this long lost love. Even the mission of the town to use this Baron as an opportunity for hope, right? So there is hope within the book, but I kept coming back to this sense of dread and feel of unease that I really love when I'm reading. So obviously I love the book. I wholeheartedly recommend it. I really think it's a great entree into this world if you're not at all typically interested, but you love reading and you love great books. At the same time, if it's something where you are a translated fiction aficionado, then you've probably already read it or you know very much about it, and I'm just here to co-sign that it is tremendous. I think it is long listed maybe for one of the awards. I'm not big on award stuff, so I don't, I can't exactly tell you whether it's like, I don't think it's the Man Booker, but the National Book Awards, new one for translated fiction. But anyway, it's the kind of book that I think is going to be talked about a lot more and will win some share of awards. And then to end, I just wanted to show you like what I'm going to read next and what I'll hope to review. I'm not somebody who, there was two things about Baron Homecoming that were a little different for me. One, it's a massive book. I don't typically read a lot of huge books because I want to devour so much, and I have a long to be read list that usually sucks up a lot of that time. But so when I read one of those, I typically then go back through and I'm going to find 5 or 6 in a row that are a little more manageable, so that I'm not reading tome after tome after tome. The other thing that's a little different is this is brand new. And I'm usually just lagging a little bit. I mean, I'm not totally plugged into publishing and what's the new sort of thing. So I'm, listening to podcasts and active on, following folks on Twitter that are super into literary translation, and I kind of get my recommendations from there and then sort of decide, oh, here's this thing from 2018 that showed up on a bunch of lists that I see at my local bookstore. I'm going to grab that, or those late night kind of sort of impulsive buys straight from the publisher when you are just listening to something and you hear about a book that you just have to have, and they may not necessarily be the most recent. So these two are not, they're new, but they're not just coming out. And I don't know which one I'm going to read next in review. I literally don't ever have a plan out like that. I just tonight, as I lie down after put the kids down, after wife and I watch a show or something, that's when I kind of stare at the two and make a decision. So first one is Convenience Store Woman, and this is by Sayaka Murata. It is translated by Jenny Tapley Takamori, and it is a Grove Press publication. One thing just real quick I love about they don't have the translator on the front, which drives me crazy. But on the back, they had the little blurb about the translator, and the last sentence is, she lives at the foot of a mountain in eastern Japan. So, that sounds amazing. I really want my wife and I to become best friends with her and to go to the foot of a mountain in eastern Japan and have tea. I want to do that. All right, so this one I'm really excited about. You can see it's a pretty small one, so I could get through that really quickly. Probably just a 2-session read. And then the other one is The Seventh Function of Language. And this is French novel by Laurent Beignet, translated by Sam Taylor. Picador is the publisher. This is getting into a whole world, apparently, of semantics that I do not know anything about. Names like, Derrida, Eco, Foucault, names that I've heard have some maybe grazing understanding of, but I'm not really immersed in. But apparently the format of this book is there is a investigator looking into a mystery, and he has to bring on an expert in those people's works to solve the mystery. So I think they're going to walk someone like me who's totally new to this right through that. I'm really excited about that. So one of these two will show up next, and I really appreciate it if you stuck it around this long. If this is something you're interested in, you can subscribe and do all that stuff that we do. And again, if I can figure it out, I'll have my Twitter down there. You can follow me, and just as I read and try to kind of join this conversation. Thanks. Be good to everybody.